So this was my first introduction to nihilism, and I always imagined it was more of the view that life is meaningless. So get fucked up on the weekends, like just
Right.
don't.
You see how there's a leap between those two ideas, though? Life is meaningless and get fucked up. Those are two very separate philosophical tenets. But yeah, go on.
Yes, I absolutely see that. But I always...
Maybe at age 15 it wasn't that obvious.
À-bas-le-ciel.
He did not think of himself as a nihilist, but it's the same kind of thing of, well, I've debunked Santa Claus, therefore I can drink whiskey every day after 4 p.m. These are not related. It's true. Santa Claus doesn't exist. What you do after 4 p.m. is up to you. Santa Claus is no longer watching what you do after 4 p.m. So there's even more responsibility on you and you alone, without Santa Claus's guidance, without consequences from Santa Claus, to decide what you're doing after 4 p.m. But whether or not it's drinking whiskey.
That's funny. No.
Really? That really puts it in perspective, doesn't it?
À-bas-le-ciel.
Recently, in a video we recorded about, I think the title is Stop Treating Native Americans Like Infants.
Uh-huh.
You
One of my least popular videos. Go on, yeah.
You said that you were raised with two parents who are both atheist, and they encouraged you to go to church services. You did attend some church services.
And synagogues and other stuff like that. Yeah, sure. Right.
Yeah. So I was raised Christian by my parents. I went through confirmation in the Lutheran church when I was 12 or 13. So I went through this class where I was a confirmed believer in Jesus, and I was baptized.
They
when I was
gave you your
born.
official get into heaven card.
Yes. Yep. Card carrying. Heaven applicant, I guess. Yeah. All right. So that's just like the context of what I'm going to describe. So, when I was growing up, I had a friend who we met in choir, but that's really the only reason why we were friends. We were both in the same choir, and this choir went on a 3-week tour of Italy. So, I got to know this guy. And he was like the polar opposite of me. I knew that
I've never heard this story before, and I have no idea where this is going, by the way.
Yeah.
In case people think there's any preparation here or anything. Good, yeah, go on, yeah.
Yeah. So he was he had a rebellious nature, and he was very outgoing. Everybody knew him. He was in multiple bands. He played music. He sang, and he was just, he just had an aura about him, right? A lot of people, he seemed like he could be a cult leader, basically. Oh. He really inspired many kids to do the same things as he did. I knew that he did drugs. I knew that he was sexually active. I knew that he had he was really mature for his age. So anyway, the reason why I bring this up is because he proclaimed himself as a nihilist. And so this was the first introduction I had to nihilism. I really didn't know what it was about, but I knew that he really liked Nietzsche, and I knew
this would have been age 15 or something. Yeah.
So this was my first introduction to nihilism, and I always imagined it was more of the view that life is meaningless. So get fucked up on the weekends, just
Right.
don't.
You see how there's a leap between those two ideas, though? Life is meaningless and get fucked up. Those are two very separate philosophical tenets. But yeah, go on.
Yes, I absolutely see that. But I always...
Maybe at age 15 it wasn't that obvious that these are two separate ideas. But yeah, go on.
Right, it wasn't. I didn't research philosophy on my own. I didn't do any reading. I just knew that that nihilism was something that, and kind of his band of followers were also vaguely nihilist, and also Buddhism. This was my first introduction to Buddhism.
So they were also interested in Buddhist philosophy to some extent.
So, my first impression was that it was really reckless and just
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, then it was.
Can I pop in? I mean, you have the story, but so another purely anecdotal thing. I think part of what's going on there is a lot of people, whether they're raised with it or not, they assume that virtue rests on some belief, and then when that belief gets refuted, they think virtue itself becomes meaningless, or the particular virtue becomes meaningless. And I have an example of this with one of my former bosses. Now, I'm going to try to keep this anonymous because of the nature of the anecdote. This is a somewhat salacious anecdote, but you can figure out what I'm talking about pretty easily. So one of my bosses, one of my employers, he grew up at least culturally Christian, I guess you'd say, celebrating Christmas and Easter, but not a believer. And both of his parents had lost their faith in, I don't know, I wish that's extreme historical circumstances. But anyway, but nevertheless grew up around in Christian culture and so on. And, when he reached a certain age, he decided, as I see some young men on the internet today, he decided that the assumptions around him and his culture were all a lie. And that therefore, very specifically and especially, laws and moral expectations surrounding sexual behavior were all nonsense. And that therefore it was perfectly all right to sleep with prostitutes, which he did in large quantities for the rest of his life. And when he met me, and he'd been through his whole life obviously challenging others and being challenged on this. I mean, his views on sexuality, you can be around atheists who do not think it's cool to sleep with prostitutes. You can be around people of all different, religious and moral characters who, say, what's the matter with you, in effect, or also people who are just surprised and ask, why don't you have a girlfriend, or why don't you choose to live some other way? And when he talked to me, I think I can say in layman's terms, it fucked him up, because I think I was the first person to challenge his assumptions without taking any of the traditional moral high ground that he was accustomed to dismissing, or what he felt he had grown out of in childhood. So he, at one point, at various points, I'd already knew before this particular conversation what his position was on human sexuality and morality and what have you. He did not think of himself as a nihilist, but it's the same kind of thing of, I've debunked Santa Claus, therefore I can drink whiskey every day after 4 p.m. These are not related. It's true. Santa Claus doesn't exist. What you do after 4 p.m. is up to you. Santa Claus is no longer watching what you do after 4 p.m. So there's even more responsibility on you and you alone, without Santa Claus's guidance, without consequences from Santa Claus, to decide what you're doing after 4 p.m. But whether or not it's drinking whiskey.
That's funny. No,
really, that really puts it in perspective, doesn't it?
Yeah, no. It's like God is like a parental figure for a lot of people. Like,
Right.
Forcing them to behave or,
and all of those objective moral standards, like, a lot of people here in Asia, including China, but includes that instead of a specific God, it was often a vague sense of the ghosts of your ancestors. But they watched you like Santa Claus. Your deceased grandparents and great-grandparents were watching you and expecting you to get married and have kids and live up to a certain moral standard. Sure. It was more permissive than the Christian Bible, but still, So to say it's not even necessarily a Christian God, you can see that same pattern playing out of the disembodied objective moral standard haunting you, right? But anyway, then what happens with the collapse? Sorry, just to finish the thing with my boss.
Yeah.
So when I challenged him, I remember sitting there and he alluded to what I already knew, his kind of anti-philosophy of why he sleeps with prostitutes, basically, or self-justification of why he sleeps with prostitutes. Mm-hmm. And I remember this particular conversation. I sat there and I said to him, if you have two young men and one of them openly says to you that he got into university because he paid bribes, he didn't write the same exams everyone else did, do you regard those two men equally? And he said, what do you mean? He was really kind of blown away by this. I said, I don't have any particular respect for university education. There are a lot of videos on this channel criticizing university education. My own experience with university education is really negative. I'm still a university student today. This is a big deal in my life. But nevertheless, I said, I don't believe in the university. But if I know two guys and I know that one only got into university because he cheated, because he paid a bribe, I regard him differently than the other people who went through the process. I don't have to believe it's virtuous to do well in your courses. And then the next point was, in terms of your actual grades, in terms of graduating, in terms of what you achieved in university, if I know that you paid bribes, if I know that you bought an A+ instead of earning it, I don't even have to believe that earning it is good. I don't have to have a valorized fetish. You know what I mean? I don't have to believe that buying it is bad. You know what I mean? And you could see where I was drawing him into this. I said, I don't have to believe in a Christian sexual morality for me to see that you paying someone to pretend to be your girlfriend is different from having someone who actually loves you and is your girlfriend. Whatever it is you have to do to earn that, which is, again, a very nebulous concept. What does it mean to earn an A+? It's actually pretty nebulous, from my perspective at least. There's no simple sense in which you earn having a girlfriend, but loving someone and being loved by them and having sex with them, whatever, even having an authentic one-night stand. It's not prostitution. You didn't pay for it. It's not phony virtue, Anyway, I had other examples after that, but that was the first one. And he had never thought in those terms at all. And for him, it was like there was this, Christian moral standard that he grew up adjacent to, at least. And then as soon as that crumbled, it's as random as, okay, there is no Santa Claus, therefore drink whiskey, or there is no God, therefore, get involved with drugs and self-destructive activities. Well, really, that's more of a current believer's mindset. Unless your current faith is so strong that your faith is the only thing preventing you from acts of wanton self-destruction. Your faith is the only thing preventing you from drinking alcohol, using drugs, or sleeping with prostitutes. That makes sense for someone who is a believer. It doesn't make sense for someone who's not a believer, right? It's shallow and it's deep at the same time.
Yeah. Sorry, what was the first phrase that when you first started talking? No, like, okay.
You'll have to rewind. I don't know. I can't answer the question for you.
You were saying the absence of faith doesn't mean
right.
Absence of virtue or something? No.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yeah. It was probably I said. It sounds like something I'd say. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. So I just had not. This was.
Right. No, I think it's a good way to look at it. But look, I without even believing in the university system, we still have questions of virtue about, actually doing your course, actually learning. That's ultimately indirectly what it's about, right? Like the virtue isn't getting an A+. The virtue is learning.
Right.
And now, well, if you paid bribes, if you paid cash on the table, which is a big problem in many countries in the world, if you paid bribes, or let's say your father, in the States, this is more common. Your father is wealthy and he makes a donation to the university, and then the university knows they have to bend the rules for you or something. Or you're a hero on the football team, and the sports team lets the professors know, you've got to get good grades if you didn't earn it. Yeah, there's still are questions of virtue here, even if I don't believe in the university, I don't believe in football, I don't believe that an A+ is actually meaningful. Sure, there are still questions of virtue. So virtue doesn't exist or cease to exist on the basis of faith. Now, if I really had to get into it, I've got other videos on this. I can again compare that to the painter with the painting. This is my standard. I use a creative baseline image for nihilism and value and meaning of life. I don't believe there's anything inherent in a blank canvas that's beautiful or meaningful, but we can take some paint and put it on the canvas, and we can create something that's meaningful and evocative. So in that same way, yeah. You had something more to say.
I don't know how to No, I mean I don't know how to really respond to what you're saying. Like I think what you're saying is really intelligent, and I really like.
Cool.
I appreciate your spin on nihilism that I've been exposed to since I first saw it when I first started watching your channel, and being in a relationship with you, being exposed to this different idea of nihilism, one that doesn't presuppose it as something that will allow you to behave recklessly because life is meaningless, because
right.
So
sure.
because this is what I saw, in this person that I knew.
Well, I think it's too. Sure.
In a sense, it's not like I, it kind of for a while, I admired him because I was just like, wow, this is just really different from what I was raised with.
Right.
I was super anti-drug, anti-alcohol, even in high school. I did not drink at all. I was, as I've said, I was the polar opposite of him in every way. So, but in this strange way, we could be friends, and I could admire him and see a different side of the story. So I appreciated my friendship with him, but I think it gave me a different view of nihilism that that you kind of broke that facade to something else.
I mean, I think, nihilism isn't disillusionmentism. You know what I mean?
Right. That's what it seemed like. It was,
right.
Yeah.
I mean, disillusionment with one set of beliefs can lead to some other set of behaviors. But I mean, you said before, you seem to write down when I said it. Well, okay, the fact that I don't believe Santa Claus is watching me. I mean, this part of the concept of Santa Claus is he's watching whether you're good or bad, and then that determines whether or not you get good presents at the end of the year, whether or not you get good presents. Who's been naughty and who's been nice. Again, it doesn't even take really a profound or adult person to realize, wow, okay, there's nobody watching me. There's nobody responsible for the consequences of my actions but me. And then to see that as increasing, my role and my importance and so on. Yeah. And I mean, on the level of values too, like even if you just think about it as being a conformist versus a nonconformist, because a lot of people don't believe in the Christian God, but they conform to Christian values or something in an unquestioned way. When you realize, look, these values are of my choosing and of my creation. Like I'm working from a blank canvas here. I'm not working from a canvas handed down to me by my grandparents or by the culture I was born into. If I wanted to, I could subscribe to a more Hindu or Buddhist set of values, or none at all, or start from a blank sheet of paper, But again, that's an even more awesome responsibility. There was this song, which is not a great song, called Be Your Own Personal Jesus. And I remember I was a child when I first heard that. And, I saw it in that way. Now, if you listen to the lyrics of the song, that's not what it's meant to be saying. But, okay, well, what if we do take it on ourselves? What do you say? Okay, well, I've got to be my own Moses. And I use Moses. I've got to write my own 10 Commandments or have none. Or I write 7 of them, and then I try to live by those commandments, and then I realize they're flawed, and I change them because they're not written in stone, because only I wrote them, and I'm not giving it to anyone else. There's a sense of an awesome, personal responsibility and a very changing set of horizons in your life that I think comes with nihilism or any kind of breakthrough like that. So I don't see it as leading to drinking alcohol and self-destructive behavior. But on the other hand, something I said to you before we started this video, I said, keep in mind, I do preach veganism to people. I do tell people they ought to be vegan. I don't tell people that they ought to be nihilist. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I don't feel this is something for everyone or something where in a really simple way I can say, everyone would benefit from it. I have a lot of videos. One of my catchphrases here is, stupidity is real. And I haven't taken any sincere interest in how stupid people or extremely stupid people would cope with this kind of challenge. I think that's kind of a legit question. Now, with that even said, I don't easily or lightly think like, well, therefore stupid people should be part of destructive religions that, preach that we should, be in a constant state of holy war or something. There's obviously a lot of danger that comes out of stupid people having faith in religion. Yeah. But I think, obviously nihilism and historical nihilism is my personal philosophy. Historical nihilism, you really saw that in the dialogue with Canada Ginseng. Canada Ginseng is another YouTuber. Yeah. Other people criticized me, I think reasonably, by saying that I wasn't sincerely interested in bringing my argument down to her level where she can understand it. I'm completely guilty as charged. I'm really not interested in dumbing down. And I do think she's a very stupid person, and she may have some kind of undiagnosed learning disability. I don't know. But like my school of nihilism, historical nihilism, with this big emphasis on, if you want to say it's learning from history, taking history seriously and so on. There are people, I think, like her who will never be capable of doing that. They'll never be capable of just sitting down and looking at, oh, wow. So to use the same example, like what is the historical reality of slavery? Just one example out of thousands. We can kind of learn so much about it, learn so much about ourselves, learn about the human condition and politics and everything, and learn about belief systems and ideologies and how they work and how they break apart. There's a lot we can learn from slavery, but she's the kind of person who can't even get on those kind of first baby steps to, what I think of as, philosophical nihilism. So it's not going to work for her. Yeah. But with that having been said, I look at someone like her and I've said sympathetic things, and it's like, wow, it's really pathetic and really tragic that you've now converted to Islam, that you've lost the little inch of freedom of thought and creativity you had in your life. Maybe you didn't have much, but that's all you had. And now it's gone because this faith has taken over your life. It's very, very sad. So I don't say that to dehumanize people, but veganism is something for everybody. It's, and I've said that in different videos. If you really believe veganism is for everybody, that's very challenging too, because that means veganism is for people who don't agree with you politically and people who come from different backgrounds, and veganism is for people who are religious, who are Christian or Hindu or whatever the religion is. There's a lot in that to challenge me too. But I don't feel nihilism is for everyone.
Yeah,
and I think your 15-year-old friend, I think he probably was the opposite. He probably thought it was. No. But anyway,
probably thought it was what?
He probably thought it was for everybody, that everybody should just get rid of their inhibitions and booze up on Thursday night or whatever,
Yeah, I think so. I think nihilism can be devastating to some people. I think like the concept that there is no belief, like
there's nothing to believe in.
There's nothing to believe in.
Yeah.
I became atheist basically. Like I lost my faith when I was in college.
I didn't really know about that about you, to be honest. I didn't know at what point you considered yourself
like
to,
when
yeah.
I guess it was, I guess it was like, I kind of am underestimating like the sorry, I'm so inarticulate about this at the moment, but how this friendship or like played a role in this, like I said, I admired this person because they were like the polar opposite of me, but it was still like, we were in a band together for like some school event. Right. So I went over to his house to practice, to rehearse, and it was just like really just like grody, and like he and his band members were smoking weed, and I like I said, I was extreme, like I was totally anti-drug. I didn't smoke or anything, and I kind of like saw just the poverty that like he lived in, and it was kind of, I don't know. Sorry, we don't have to include this, but I think, but this kind of also had an impact on me.
But
like
you think that
what is like who is this for? Like, who is this belief system for? Like, what kind of people? Is it people that have been raised in certain circumstances or not? Because sorry, I don't.
But you think that lit a spark for you, that led to you questioning Christianity in a different way, or no? I mean,
yeah, and generally, like, once I went to college, I didn't attend church every week.
Yeah.
And I really was thinking about it more, and why am I praying at night? Why do I pray every night when I get into bed? Like, who am I talking to? Like, am I talking to anybody?
Yeah.
There had always been like...
You've told me stories about your own kind of skepticism or semi-atheism as a child.
Yeah.
But you did actually continue praying until like early college years. Wow. Okay, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it was like, I think I was in a rebellious phase when I first started college in a variety of ways. And I didn't become like I didn't then like, oh, it must be nihilism or something,
Right. When you said before that, you think it would be devastating for some people to lose faith or transition to nihilism or something, I have trouble imagining that. But I mean, the main form of belief, like real world belief that matters to people a lot, that they cling to, that I've seen in my life, is probably belief in nation and nationality, like belief that Canada is a great country, or belief in the United States, or this kind of thing. That can mean a lot to people. And for me, growing up in Canada, Toronto, Canada, and having everyone constantly telling you that Canada is the best place in the world, and Toronto is the best place in Canada.
Yeah.
But this kind of thing. But I'm being constantly told that Canada is better than the United States. That was the ego trip. That's the comparison, that everything in Canada is better, and Americans think America is the greatest country in the world, but it's not, and this kind of thing. So I mean, when you said that, like, oh, well, it would cause people a lot of suffering. I see a lot of suffering in people trying to maintain those delusions, like the same way people trying to justify their own religion and justify their place in their religion and justify the crimes committed in the name of the religion, what have you. I see a lot of suffering in that. And even within Buddhism, we're relatively, nonviolent, relatively, a religion doesn't have the kind of obvious sexual and psychological problems that, Islam does. in terms of interfering with your normal life. It's not repressive in the same way, but still people trying to justify to themselves and others, this religion. Mm-hmm. If anything, I can see a sense of relief in escaping from that. But I think probably the one that's the most troubling is nationalism and belief in your nation, and then living without that afterwards. I mean, just on a really practical level, like during the time we've been together, during the last 6 months or 8 months, I've talked about with you moving to a long list of countries. Mm-hmm. When I talk about whatever, universities in Canada or education options in Canada, I'm openly saying to you, like, well, maybe our time would be better spent in Germany or New Zealand or, like Taiwan. There's this kind of amazingly long list. Now, this isn't some kind of, outre theoretical anti-nationalism. You know what I mean? This isn't like a critique of what's wrong with Canadian Parliament, which I also do. I also do criticize what's wrong with Canadian Parliament. But that's living with this kind of grim awareness. Well, my country is just one country among many. Maybe it's better than some other countries in a few particular ways, but then it's worse in other ways. There are advantages and disadvantages and so on. Yeah. So, that's one that definitely haunts me and causes suffering and so on. And it's connected to real world, questions. And definitely, just even the kind of self-confidence of the sort of stereotype American bumpkin. And I've met a couple of British people like that too. British people who really think that jolly old England is the best place they could possibly live. I do, like, even if it's just in that harmless way, you can see how that gives people's lives, shape and direction. I would not say meaning. I think it, but it gives their lives kind of shape and direction that mine absolutely doesn't have.
Yeah.
And I'm left instead with a very sincere, constant questioning of, okay, like, let's say I'm a painter. Let's say I'm a visual artist. Is my time being wasted by being a painter in Canada or in Victoria, Canada, specifically one place again, as opposed to being in Madrid? The same effort I'm putting into this art, would there be better outcomes or a better audience for it? And I think that's a question we should ask ourselves. But I'd say my life is really drowning in those questions all the time because of my lack of nationalism and my negative relationship towards Canadian nationalism as ideology and in practical reality. So, honestly, this is just a response to you having said, would cause people a lot of suffering. Well, in some ways, I don't feel that way at all, but that's an example of something where I could see that coming out of it. Yeah,
okay. I guess what I could say for my experience, I don't think it was really, I wouldn't say devastating, but as you said, like, throughout my younger years, like I had questioning about Christianity. The main thing that really I was questioning is the concept of death. I think was a huge part of it, in belief in Christianity, because when you die, you will go to heaven. Right. And I felt this because when I was growing up, my dad was often very sick, and like it was a real threat. Like my dad could die. Like I don't want him to like die and never like, have any
to die and cease to exist, and therefore.
Yeah, exactly. And like I remember just lying in bed thinking about this and really like examining, like, is this at all plausible? Is this just something made up so that you feel more comfortable with life and death? So I think that was a big part, and I think it would be devastating to some people. And I remember like at funerals also having discussions about it. At the funeral of one of my grandparents, one of my cousins said, like, I don't know if Christianity is, right about everything, but I might as well believe in it, because then when I die, I'll go to heaven. Like I might as well just kind of go along with it, because if I don't believe in it, then fine, then I'll be screwed. But if I do believe in it and it's not real, then I won't know the difference.
Right.
It was just like really striking. It was I think that was in high school for me too. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
Anyway,
I've,
sorry,
I've
that's kind of
noticed.
aimless.
No, it's fine. But I mean, for me,
I can see that being difficult for some people to process that.
Sure, but I mean, for me, the challenge of both religion and philosophy, and thus nihilism, is how am I going to live a meaningful life, which is different from and similar to the question of what is the meaning of life. But how am I going to live a meaningful life is putting the onus on me clearly. And again, what's the meaning of this blank canvas as opposed to how am I going to take this canvas and make something meaningful out of it? And some people, including some theories of psychology, put a lot of emphasis on this confrontation with death. But I've never really been risk averse that way. I've never been afraid of death or dying. The process of dying or death, which for some people are two very distinctive things. Mm-hmm. Some people are not afraid of death, but are afraid of dying and that kind of thing. So for me, maybe that's why I don't relate to the kind of, the reasons why people cling to.
I think because you weren't raised with this initial belief when you were a child that like death wasn't finite. A lot of. Like, at least I was raised that way. Like, when you die, that's not it. There's something greater after you die. Yeah. And of course, I don't believe that at all anymore. Like, it seems like Santa Claus is the same as Santa Claus. Like, it's just some fanciful thing to tell kids, and it's just sad because, like, if you grow up not thinking that way, I think it's really beneficial. And and it's also, just coming back to what I said in the beginning, like it's also beneficial for your parents to have recommended like, hey, you can go to these church services and choose for yourself like what religion, rather than being indoctrinated into one and say like, this is what you will be. I
don't think they thought it through that much. But what would be the outcome of my going and attending different churches? I really don't think they thought that through because, of course, they'd be horrified if I did convert.
So they just saw it as like a social experiment for you to like.
I don't know. Could have been bad parenting on their part, but you did just point out one positive aspect of it. But this issue with belief in the afterlife. I mean, it fundamentally is the same as Santa Claus because then the point is not just. This doesn't liberate you, it binds you. Yeah. Then you have to live your life beholden to the grave. Then your whole life becomes defined in terms of how you're going to live vis-a-vis, this set of commandments you have to live up to, or what defines what happens after you die. So very, very strange way of thinking. I remember reading a Christian criticism of Buddhism. So I was interested in all these things. In all these countries like Cambodia and Laos, Sri Lanka, there are Buddhists who choose to convert to Christianity. And one of the Christians, this was a Cambodian guy who converted to Christianity from Buddhism. He said, in Buddhism, you just have to do good deeds all the time. And it's never enough. And he said, in Christianity, you know when you're saved. So it's stuff like this, covering...
Just profess that you believe in Jesus Christ.
There's a checklist. No, there's a checklist, and then I think you can't commit murder. There are a few, you can't.
If you repent,
okay.
if you say you're sorry.
Anyway,
it's really absurd. But
there's some list. There's some checklist you can live up to, and then be confident. He said, whereas if you believe in Buddhism, you're just kind of running around trying to do the best you can all the time. It's it's terrible. And I remember reading this saying like, yes, that's exactly why Buddhism is better than Christianity. Yeah. There's none of this bullshit. It's just do good deeds all the time.
Right.
Of course, I mean, Buddhism has its own bullshit. But I also thought of the how absurd the concept of sufficient virtue. I've done enough.
Yeah.
Now I can just watch football or I don't even know, go skiing, whatever it is they're into. No, they've done enough to satisfy, God and heaven and the grave. So nothing more can be demanded from them. That also seems to me a very dangerous idea. Sufficient virtue. Sufficient virtue leads to evil. It seems to me. But or a life of
I think a lot of this also relates to veganism in a way because like a lot of people say like, well, I do enough good for the environment. I have an electric car, so why do I need to go vegan?
I talked with a guy online who said very sincerely, he said I've done enough because he'd been a gay rights activist.
Oh.
He was like, I had 15 years experience speaking about therefore, and it's like, dude, that's not the way it works. It's not like you were a gay rights activist for 10 years. Now you can go in your backyard and slit the throat of a pig and watch the blood pouring into the gutter in front of you and be like, well, fuck you. It sucks to be you, pig. Too bad for the environment. Too bad for my health. Too bad for this pig. It just doesn't make sense, Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so.
All right.
Yeah.
Nihilism.
Kind of freeform video
That's
about
cool.
why I appreciate your views on nihilism and how they've affected me.
Yeah, and I guess the thing is, what you said earlier was that, when you first met me, it was just a challenge to your assumptions about nihilism, because you associated nihilism with this kind of hyper self-indulgent, disillusioned lifestyle in terms of sex and drugs and alcohol.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And very fundamentally, I just say, well, there are no gods above me. I'm not relying on some legislator like Moses to write my laws, but for me, that only increases the responsibility.
Right. I guess the final thing that I was thinking of, I did mention this one day when we were walking around, is that a lot of practices of yours are commonly associated with certain religions. So not drinking is, so you have these things about you that, people might assume it's religious, but it's not. It's really it's the opposite. You have no belief, and so it's just right.
Yeah. I think there are two. There are two really simple stages. Whether it's not drinking alcohol or living a kind of disciplined and scholarly lifestyle or something.
Yeah, right.
I think people can look at that and say, well, if you're not doing this just for its own good, why are you doing it? Like, would you be doing these things just because God tells you to, or Moses tells you to? Right.
Buddhism,
right. But for me, I think that the really dangerous step is to be out there trying to do good without even believing in good and evil. And that's, I think that's the precipice nihilism puts you on, but I think it's a very powerful position to be in, because again, even with humanitarian work, you meet people who say, like, well, how dare you question X, Y, or Z? They really believe in things being good and evil, programs or whatever it is they're involved in.
Yeah.
They may believe in the American bombing of Vietnam as good, whatever it is, because there are all kinds of things you can believe in that are not gods and are not religions or whatever. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, no, I'm able to take this truly skeptical position of saying, well, I don't know if this is good or evil. I was involved, real life examples, probably should have tilted this down, but, I was involved with a humanitarian program, and they were supposedly improving agriculture to prevent people starving. And even something as obvious as that, you really have to ask, well, is this good or is this evil, or do I not know yet? Mm-hmm. And something as ostensibly, who could question that, like you just use the word like improving agricultural methods to help the poor. Of course it must be good. Well, get involved and keep your wits about you. Keep a kind of skeptical or nihilistic attitude, and you start to see all the ways in which it's bad. Again, this is very not vegan, but in one of my villages where I did this humanitarian work, the people used to eat frogs, and they would really go out and gather frogs en masse, because a lot of these forms of agriculture in Southeast Asia are in puddled. So there's the like rice farming, where there's the water level is called puddling the land. So there's so frogs come in. You get a lot of frogs living in, reproducing in, and burrowing in, whether it's your rice crop or your whatever it is you're farming in those conditions. You got intentionally wet land that way. And they would go out and kill hundreds and hundreds, or maybe more than 1,000 frogs, and they'd have them in big wooden barrels, which I saw. Well, then they start using improved, meaning modern, meaning Western agricultural methods. Now they're spraying the crops with pesticides. And reportedly, I can believe this, reportedly the frogs soak up the pesticides, and people eat the frogs and get sick now. Hey, footnote, obviously I don't have hard scientific proof, but everyone there was observing this. They said, oh, now that we spray the crops with pesticides, we can't eat the frogs anymore. And some things had just disappeared from the ecosystem. They said we used to get mushrooms and these other plants growing, and this stuff is now probably because there were fungicides involved in whatever they were spraying on the crops and so on. You start to see how the whole community changes, the whole ecology changes. Shifting from swidden agriculture, which is actually called shifting agriculture also, moving from swidden agriculture to Western-style permanent agriculture. Well, we used to regrow the forest. We used to have all this wildlife. We used to live in a different way. And then you're imposing a modern Western scheme of farming on them and so on. And I met people out there. I don't take this view. I met people there who were even challenging the idea that we should stop these people from growing opium. They'd say, well, look, before they farmed opium, and this is part of their traditional culture, and now you're forcing a modern Western belief on them and so on. Anyway, on that one, I do genuinely believe their communities are improved by getting rid of opium. If that makes me an asshole, so be it. You know what I mean? But yeah, things as obvious as that. So no, I mean, there's undertaking, to do something good just because you believe it's good. You don't believe Santa Claus is watching you. You don't believe there's a reward in your afterlife or everything else. But then there's undertaking to do things with the profound knowledge that the difference between good and evil is an idea in our own heads, like the difference between a weed and a vegetable. Vegetables are weeds, weeds are vegetables. You can farm dandelions, or you can intentionally kill them all. It's just in your own mind, and with a kind of a profound anxiety about the limits of your own knowledge and awareness, and that you may not know what's good or bad, what's destructive or constructive until it's too late, as that whole circumstance unfolds. So that is what I practice. And you can see already why that's not something that's easy to preach.
Yeah.
It's not even in that context. Like, it's not easy for me to say to someone else who's working in humanitarian work, like, well, you really shouldn't believe in this stuff.
Yeah, right.
You should remain profoundly open-minded to the possibility that what you're doing here is wrong and destructive and is ruining these people's livelihoods and is ruining their village. And I knew examples of that. I can show you one that's written up. A village that was completely depopulated, that ended up with the population abandoning the village because of humanitarian intervention from the French government in Laos. It's hilarious and bizarre. And from those people, they believed they were doing something good. They believed they were lifting these people out of poverty. Instead, they were taking them from poverty to homelessness plus poverty. They completely destroyed their village through humanitarian intervention, all of which could have been described, I'm sure, in ideologically very pleasing terms. All right.
À-bas-le-ciel.